All right, so that was some music from Andrew Barnes Jamieson, our guest for today.
Yeah.
How are you, Andrew?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. So
Good.
that was a
Thank you for having me.
it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
A binary form, pretty straightforward there.
Pretty straightforward. We heard a little, yeah. We heard a a little exposition and a little middle section and a little and then I was kind of well, no, binary form means it's been a while since I've been in school and properly studied this stuff. Binary form means we have a beginning that repeats, which is exactly what we heard. We heard this little melody of the spiritual Ezekiel saw the wheel, and then we kind of heard it repeated. Then we heard a B section, which actually involves all the instruments playing forms of that melody again, but independently rather than in unison, and interspersed with a lot of the sort of free jazz, quasi improvised, sort of dissonant sonorities that are an important part of my aesthetics much of the time. So,
So just from those 2 minutes, not even 2 minutes, we can say that you have a pretty eclectic language, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm told that one of my unique gifts, if it is even a gift, is as an artist or composer or deconstruction worker, is to bring things that people think have nothing to do with each other. Deconstruction worker. We can talk a little bit more about what that means, but that's at the top of my CV these days, and that's the term that I've settled on, that I can try to define it as much as I can. So yeah, but then I'm told that one of the things that I do, for better and for worse, is sort of bring things together that people think don't belong together, and just kind of put them together and make them sort of inhabit the same space. Which, another word that I use to describe the kind of musical work that I do, the kind of composition and arranging that I do, is avant-gospel. Avant-gospel, which is sort of, so again, a combination of sort of avant-garde and the kind of experimentation that I was often am interested in as a composer, but also sort of encounter in a lot of the communities where I developed my work as a composer and developed my voice, between sort of the academia that encourages a certain, where often is a place where we develop some kinds of experimentation in the work that goes on in certain academic composition programs. Certainly at Northwestern, where Megan and I were both undergrads, as well as Mills College, where I did my master's. So those are those universities are some of the, and academic programs are some of the sort of some of the sort of supporters of the kind of musical work that I've done, and also sort of some of the places where I've kind of developed my voice. And then also, just kind of other kinds of underground experimental music communities, different concert series that happen. I've played with a lot of musicians in Oakland, California, where I had been living for the last 12 years after, from when I started at Mills for the next 10 years after that. Many of whom came from a diverse set of backgrounds, but we're all interested in experimental music, similar to the sort of legacy of Mills College, but not necessarily with any connection to Mills College whatsoever. So we developed these sort of underground independent communities of that support experimental music, and so I was really drawn to the kinds of aesthetics that those kinds of communities are supporting, and bringing that together with gospel music, as thinking about the church, and as for example, as being another one of the communities and institutions that supports musicians. I heard somebody say recently that churches are some of the sort of the best and most effective sort of public conservatories that we have in the United States. And they were talking in particular about the Black church, which is also kind of in particular what I would talk about. I am a white, Caucasian American, and I think it's important for me to identify that position and the kind of bias that often comes with that position, and talking especially about issues of race and how we live together in a diverse community where there's often an imbalance of power, and I have to locate myself as sort of being part of in this sort of power, in the sort of powerful position of being a white person, also a straight cisgender male, and all of those things. But nevertheless, like the Black church has often specifically been a supporter of my work, and an employer for me, and an opportunity for, a place where I could really kind of thrive as a musician in a particular way. And that's where that's sort of where I developed a lot of my passion and interest around gospel music. I was in a few majority or entirely Black congregations in different parts of the U.S. So that at different times in my life, and then I'm still kind of probably a little bit eclectic and all over the place as I sort of try to attempt to explain myself. But this avant gospel term that I brought up is kind of an intentional synthesis of those those specific two worlds, the specific avant-garde and experimental world with Black gospel music. And talking about, and bringing them together in particular ways, while sort of acknowledging, what I sort of brought up before, with sort of a lot of power imbalance between the different traditions and the different communities that they represent, and how I think that an effective community model for dialogue, that is what I'm trying to sort of express in this music, as these different communities and different voices that are present within the different traditions can learn from each other and challenge each other as much as they attempt to find common ground and harmonize. But doing so, I think, with radical accountability, especially in a way that sort of acknowledges who's most marginalized within the community, if that makes sense. So I could talk more about how I attempt to do that in my music, and how I attempt to do that outside of my musical work, as I sort of work, as I just try to instigate more conversations examining systems and institutions and bias within them, and even within our aesthetic systems and our aesthetic sensibilities and artistic decisions. Where is their bias, and where is there times when we have a vested interest in something other than justice and equity within the relationship, if that makes any sense. So again, I'll kind of all over the place, a little bit eclectic, but those are some of the things that come up in ways I talk about avant gospel music.
You express a lot of different, because you have a lot of different influences, and like you've expressed some of them, but just like for people who don't know you, can you like give a quick biographical information about
Sure.
like who you
Well,
are?
I would probably start with my time at Northwestern University, at the School of Music at
Yeah.
Northwestern University, which is
Yes.
which is now
So
called
me and
Beeman
Andrew went
School of
to
Music.
Northwestern together. Yeah.
And Megan and I were in the same year at Northwestern as undergrads. So I
Same
think
here, and
Oh, so
we
you
were
are
the
the
only
same
two
age then?
undergrads that.
Okay.
Yes, we're the same age, and we were the only two undergrads at the time that were interested in, like really contemporary music and all the other. There was a really great doctoral program, and we got to interact with a lot of those people. But the rest of the undergrads were more invested in other departments like theater and like film, and not really into the composition department.
There were 2 or 3 other composers in our year that were in the same programs, theoretically doing the same degree and the same classes.
Yes.
I can
felt like
barely
they
remember
put more
who.
effort into other departments.
I was gonna say I can barely remember who they were. I do remember who they were, but but it's like they were not did not end up. I mean, and no. And I'm sure that I think they are all of them doing very interesting things out in the world, even out in the musical world. But I don't want to.
They had a very different path point and influences from
very,
the beginning, and they were, so.
Which is to say, Megan and I were kind of the two in, even in other years. I think we had kind of uniquely situated to that we really were supporting each other, I think, in our musical growth in a very particular way, and discovering a lot of the same things at the same times, having a lot of the same conversations, asking a lot of the same questions, going to almost all of the same concerts, and so
well, just a parenthesis. I think that that's very important to have a musical community, and you at Northwestern had a musical community of at least 2 people, even if it's 2 people.
Well, exactly.
It was us, and then there was a lot of doctoral students that were like mentors to us. I felt like they were really good mentors.
They were
and, like,
mentors. It's not like you were at the same level. Andrew was speaking also of
I think they talked to us respectfully, but we weren't at the same level at that time.
And how gospel music kind of influenced him. So community is a big part of how you conceive of music. Is what I was just trying to say in that parenthesis. So
that's wonderful. Yeah.
The influence of having a community,
and it was
a community.
Absolutely.
What was at your time at Northwestern too, where you first got introduced to gospel, or you got more integrated to gospel communities?
That's right. So I actually, so being on the campus at Northwestern was really only half of my life and half of my work. During the time that I was there, and the other half of the time I would go. We were Northwestern was in Evanston, Illinois, and I would walk about 3 miles all the way across the city of Evanston for the other part of my musical life, where I got hired as a keyboardist for 2 congregations in that area, that both of whom were basically entirely Black congregations. One was a member of, or belonged to the Baptist Church, and was part of the long-standing Baptist Black Baptist tradition, and the other was a non-denominational Pentecostal church, and was kind of a little bit more in some contemporary aesthetics, but also still doing some very old African American songs and preaching styles, and especially when we're looking at Pentecostalism. And I can talk about how a lot of the Black church is influenced by this tradition of Pentecostalism, and how eventually I that became a part of my master's thesis, and it's become a huge part of my thinking about improvisation. But particularly Pentecostal churches have that Pentecostal tradition as being very central. and it's the way I think of it is that its origins come from West Africa aesthetically, and there's a lot of there's a lot of complexity to the history of how it made it to America, and what and the histories of oppression and sort of intentionally trying to silence a lot of the things about West African culture in order to enforce white supremacy. But but I think nevertheless, like, there was this way in which some of the African traditions were kind of preserved and reborn in North America in the Azusa Street revival, and that is sort of considered the origin of Pentecostalism. But then you see it, in Pentecostal churches around the world, even without African and African American populations, but particularly in the Black church. So anyway, I really didn't expect to be going into a long explanation of Pentecostalism, but it is a huge
it's relevant
influence on a lot of things that happen in North America and around the world, and particularly in my own work and in my improvisation practice and in my and so I guess one of the things that part of what I'm getting at is that I became kind of an improviser through playing in these churches, and I talked about it often I think about it often in Pentecostal terms, where you talk about the Spirit, moving with the Spirit. Like, people say, people will say, well, people will feel like worship will flow with the Spirit, or the Spirit, help guide our decisions within the community or in our day-to-day life. And I often feel like that the way that we understand Spirit, maybe the way that we understand the collective unconscious, as a way of understanding Spirit, becomes the way that I would improvise in a group of musicians, or even the way that I improvise as an individual, trying to sort of channel what it is that how I feel the Spirit connecting all of us, moving through me as an individual. So I on some other words. Oh, go ahead.
One question: would you mean the collective unconscious in the same way as Jung, or in the same way as Freud? In which of those of two?
So you're exposing my ignorance in sort of my lack of
Doesn't matter. It's okay.
That's a great question. I'm sure I'm about to go back.
Would you say that you have this religious background, like worshiping in your music too, or do you only take inspiration from gospel music and from the uses? Is your music function also that of worshiping, of projecting the spirit of the collective, let's say? Would you say so or no?
Well, I think that community is often a strong supporter of our work, and I think that that's something that I want to name and honor and celebrate. I also think that oh no, and I'm losing my thought. I had a great answer, wonderful answer to your question, and it's not in my brain anymore. I think oh yeah, so I think the community, this is my answer. So community is also the context, I think, for it's intentionally, I think, the context for a lot of my music. I'm trying to really think about what is this music saying within the community? Mm-hmm. How is this music empowering to different parts of the community? How is it challenging to different parts of the mm-hmm. community? Do people feel heard and represented in this music? Do they feel like there's some familiarity with it? And so I think the community is a context for my music, and the way that I think about it is that community mm-hmm. is the context for all of our music, and that there's never a way in which music isn't about community, but I think that it's sort of acknowledging that with some intentionality can be a very powerful way of sort of amplifying the effect and the significance of our music. So, I mean, so part of it is sort of taking is sort of being responsive to the spiritual experience of the community and the audience and the spiritual needs, and and I think that it's all, I could talk more about sort of whether I have specific beliefs that come into play with this work, but I could talk about sort of whether or not I share common ground with somebody at a particular church or a particular faith gathering or a particular secular gathering or a particular people just sitting in a concert hall. But I think that anytime in any given community, you're going to have people who don't really agree with each other, right? And there's always going to be a diversity of opinions and a diversity of beliefs. And even I think even within a traditional religious gathering, there's going to be people having their own personal thoughts and their own personal experiences and their own personal questions.
Definitely, the history of religion shows us just that, because of the debates in theology and all, and disagreements and all of that. I guess that this would lead me to another question, like, how do you see yourself as an individual in this community, in this
sometimes I start by...
Do you try to separate yourself and just let the voice of the community speak in your music, or do you try to, let's say, put a touch of all of that history that you have as a composer, as a musician, etc., etc.?
Well, I this is why, and this is why I make an effort, whether it's called for or not, to sort of locate myself within the conversation and within the community. And I often talk about it in terms of race, in terms of gender, and other kinds of identity. I could also talk about economics and about sort of being, a U.S. citizen speaking English natively and other languages that I do and don't speak, which there aren't a lot of them, although I do speak Spanish as a second language. But and so and those things aren't things that I particularly am trying to highlight or express, and especially because in almost every case, when it comes to sort of this sense of this identity that I have within community, in almost every case, everything that I have about me is things that already tend to be centered in especially dominant systems, right? You go to university and you read things written by a lot of white men, right? And if they're not men, they're probably still white, or if they're not white, they may well still be men and things like that. So I'm not particularly trying to talk about any of that. I could go a little bit more into, I think the older I get, the more that I have been leaning into a sense of identity that sort of is related to the unique and personal visions or the unique and personal experiences that I have, that often relate to the way that I process life within my own brain. That's related to the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis that I've had for most of my life. And I think autism spectrum is actually still kind of an identity and something that I'm learning to embrace and express and think about how it really has given me these unique, I mentioned like visions earlier, like imaginations, visions for the way that the world can be, and things like that I really do want to express as an individual, that I think people who aren't autistic, or even people who are autistic but don't have the unique whatever brain wiring that I have, might not be able to see. And so I think that that's kind of where where I really want to kind of express my individuality, and where I also happen to have a more marginalized identity in a particular way. So I think a lot about this
Mhm.
this identity and this idea of marginalization. And the reason that I try to locate myself in terms of all these other things is mostly just to highlight my bias, because I think that when I look at myself as an individual, or when I want people to look at me as an individual in the sense that I want them to sort of understand that how the ways in which I'm biased as I try to enter into these conversations, whether they're musical conversations or extra musical conversations. Like, I have this bias. I'm going to see them in a particular way because of the particular vantage point that I have. And I think that, I understand why we often want to be objective, and I certainly appreciate the sort of effort to really kind of be objective. But the world is full of white men trying to be objective, or claiming that they're objective, or telling everybody that they need to that we need to think like them in order for us to be objective. Like, we don't need any more of that at all. I think that the extent to which we represent dominant and privileged identities is the extent to which we really do need to kind of challenge that objectivity and challenge the ways in which the things that we see might or express the fact that the things that we see may not be may impede our ability to see the whole picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it totally does. Like, I think you went far and beyond answering my question about the individual Andrew in his compositions and the collective, like,
Mhm.
let's say musical community in your work. So, Megan, is there anything you want to ask? Or
I think I'm. No, I mean, do you want to play some of your music, maybe?
okay, what do you want me to play?
So
Do you want me to search for something in particular? Well, I must going back. Like, black gospel music. I don't know if it's taught at universities. Like, have you ever seen any program with gospel music? Let's say.
so I
It
could
wasn't
I
any
could
of my programs.
I could there are, let's see. There's a lot of things that I could say, and one of the
Because
things that
you describe it as marginalized music,
Mhm.
music that's not uh, academic and stuff. And actually, I
Mhm.
was like
Mhm.
last week or 2 weeks ago, I was playing, what was it? Bluegrass music, and
Mhm.
it got me thinking about it. All of this music that is we never talk about in academic context or anything like that. Um, so
Well, it is
gospel might
interesting
be
too,
one.
especially for
Uh-huh.
comprehensive exams. You're told that anything from the beginning of the time is fair game, but none of us ever study. I mean, at least I never studied gospel. I never studied bluegrass. I never studied folk music. Never studied world music in preparing for these exams
Yeah, I
because
bet like
there wasn't a thought in my head that it would be on it, and it wasn't.
even somebody like Duke Ellington, who I think is really revered in academic circles, probably does not make it onto a lot of doctoral comprehensive exams. I'm
Yeah.
assuming. I could be wrong. I have yet to actually get my doctorate, so I could be wrong. But that just wouldn't surprise me if and um
Yeah.
and I so
So the only way you can get this type of education is going out there and playing the music.
yep,
It's like you said, like
yep,
the church as public conservatories and
exactly.
conservatories. Like, also,
Mhm.
I can relate to that because in a way, like, if you want to listen in Puerto Rico to organ music,
Hmm.
any type of organ music, you will have to go to a church.
Hmm.
Pretty much they were built around the 19th century, and well, sometimes, most of the time, it's kind of like pretty simple music, but at other times it's more complex type of music. But at the same time, it teaches you something that you might not hear at the Department of Music at the University of Puerto Rico, for example, or that you might
Mhm.
not listen too much at the Conservatory of Music in Puerto Rico, and that's the organ itself, like, and the organ is like, it kind of, the organ is a very interesting instrument because it kind of lies
Mhm.
between, in between worlds, right? It's like, I don't know how much is it used in gospel music or in
So
gospel.
it's so if we're talking about organ and gospel music, we have to talk about the different kinds of organs.
Oh, there's something.
So I don't
Oh
know.
yeah, same thing.
Hello,
Hi, how you
Shanti.
doing?
Hey,
Nice to
You
meet
made
you,
it.
Andrew.
how are
Oh,
you
nice to
doing?
meet you. Good. It's glad that you can make it. It's a pleasure to be here with the entire Forgotten Composers
Uh-huh.
crowd tonight. So it's good to see you. Um, so
Yeah.
so I can't talk a ton about the different kinds of pipe organs that exist. I mean, but I know that in the 20th century, um, there was a lot of innovation around electronic organs, and so now sort of
Mhm.
there's you know usually Eurocentric classical oriented churches that are buying like basically like synthesizer organs. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but they're like electronic organs that like sound a
Like the
lot like
Hammond,
there are pipes.
like the Hammond, for example.
And so the Hammond is a completely separate. Well, it's not. At this moment in time, I consider the Hammond to be a completely separate history. So I think initially, in the early days of the Hammond organ was designed as one of the early imitations of the pipe organ, which that technology has now come a long way. That the electronic organs can now potentially like sound, because they're synthesizers, they can sound
Mhm.
more like pipes. But the Hammond organ sounded as close to pipes as they were able to get when the Hammond organ was invented. But I think, to most of our contemporary ears, they do not particularly sound like pipes. And what eventually happened, there was a few different electronic organs that were similar to the Hammond in that they were getting closer to imitating the pipe organ, but they weren't really successful. But specifically with the Hammond and with a few of the other electric organs, but principally the Hammond, people started discovering that it had all this potential for a lot of other traditions outside the classical music where organs were being used, and
Mhm.
particularly in the Black church, the Hammond organ became a huge, as my understanding, is that the Hammond organ. I experienced the Hammond organ as a huge um, influence on the sound of Black gospel music and of Black Christian worship
Mhm.
in North America, and specifically the Hammond. And in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, is that when you try to sort of play gospel music on a pipe organ, which I have done a number of times, and sometimes requested by gospel musicians who didn't have a Hammond organ available and did have a pipe organ, um, I think it doesn't it doesn't work for me. It always sounds
Mhm.
like you're a white guy who doesn't know how to play the music, right? So like, um, I think it just sounds silly. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we could do somebody probably knows how to
Mhm.
do it better than I do.
This kind
Pipe
of
organ is
relates to
fantastic
what
music, but
we were talking last week, Megan. Like, even in in different organs, like, you have to take into consideration the
Uh-huh.
specific organ. With organs, it's more complex. I think the aspect of timbre and pitch,
Yeah.
all of that.
so
Huh.
I
It,
don't know.
And I still remember the experiments you did in the organs in Northwestern. Um,
Yeah, we did. So that was a pipe
where you
organ
would have
experiment,
assistants.
I really
And
wish
I
that
don't think I've ever seen anything similar since, to be honest. I don't
I
think I've
really
seen
wished I did
anyone
a pipe
exploring
organ
organ in that way.
experimental piece at Northwestern. I really wish that I could have done a Hammond organ experimental piece, and I still would be interested to do that, but I haven't done that yet. But the pipe organ piece involved, I think it was a just required two performers. So I was the performer sitting at the organ keys
Yeah.
and manipulating some of the what are they called? They're not
pistons?
levers, pistons. Yep, pistons this is a kind of organ that has pistons. So I would pull out the pistons, and I would sometimes only pull them halfway out or part of the way out, so that they don't fully engage, but they partially engage, so that you don't get the full sound of the pipe, and instead you get maybe like a lower frequency, and it's always out of a different intonation, so you can get different kinds of harmonies and different sounds. And that was a lot of fun, I think, to sort of pull out these pistons halfway, and then the other performer would entirely be assigned to maybe some of the pistons himself, but also like some of the pipes, where he would put his hand over the top of the pipe to alter the sound, or over at the bottom of the pipe there's usually a little valve or something where some of the air comes out of there as well, and he would just kind of play with all of those parts of the organ pipes to create different kinds of organ sounds. So this is part of for me this is part of the being a deconstruction work, or sort of taking. And this is why I have so much common ground, I think, with so many experimental musicians, is really kind of pushing the boundaries. I mean, this is really just extended techniques, but that's something that I really appreciate and admire about composers in new music, is sort of pushing the boundaries of what can happen with some of these instruments. Anyway, organs do have a lot to do with the gospel music sound, and there is actually you can get quite a rich timbral variation, usually just with the drawbars on the Hammond organ, and so which are basically like the overtones of the harmonic series, and you can manipulate those in some really sophisticated ways if you know what you're doing. But certainly the organ does end up being a huge something I certainly have come to really love and think of as sort of an essential component of a lot of the kinds of aesthetics and community music experiences that really get me excited.
Well, Shunting, are you there? Probably no.
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
You also have experience with church music and church organs, right?
Yeah. Not really with the church organ, because this church I used to serve didn't have organ. So actually, I'm learning a lot from Andrew's sharing. You know what? Not long time ago, when I was still at UB, there was a project that we needed to write a short piece for organ. I didn't know that.
I think we were there. Megan, do you remember this?
Yeah.
No.
And
I never got the opportunity to write for organ. I know that.
No. It must have been. Was it in your first year or second year or something like that?
I guess the second year or third year, right? Yeah.
I don't remember.
I wrote a lot of staccato for the organist, and then I couldn't hear any differences. I was very ignorant about the instrument at that time. Yeah. But I would like to try one day if I can write for organ. One of my fondest memories as an undergraduate is the performance of the organ symphony in C minor
by Borjak.
No. Sing Seven.
Saint
Saint, right? Oh
yeah.
my God!
Oh yeah, it's a song. Yeah.
Whatever, however you pronounce it.
Yeah.
Not really. I don't remember that being played there. I remember it. I listened to it in Puerto Rico, I think. But yeah. But how were you listening to the other stuff that Andrew was saying about gospel music and stuff like that, and like his experience with community, and like how it has shaped his style in a way, and all of that? Can you relate something of your own experience to his?
You mean my or?
Yeah, because I know that you've worked a bit in churches.
I've worked for like I have worked for one single church since like 2018, and then I recently quitted the job, and I would say in my job is more like a community service that I help the music enthusiasts learn a bit for the music, and I believe the music culture at a Chinese church is very different from the ones at black or white churches, because we mostly sing praise songs by a Taiwanese gospel music group, and actually their music is is very similar to um, simpler version of pop music. Yeah, just they like have a little bit narrower vocal range, simpler arrangement, and actually I was very very interested when Andrew talked about like using like uh, variety of timbre harmonies and dissonances, because in our culture the church music tends to be more conventional,
Mm-hmm.
more conservative, um, and and sometimes I make fun of the worship team that, oh, every time I told them, oh, it's like every week I play the same music because all of them begin with do re mi, but at different keys, but all the time do re mi or mi fa sol all the time,
That's right.
and then always begin with the tonic chord, and and then the first inversion of the dominant chord, and then the submedian chord. I can close my eye and open the same harmony all the time. So actually, it's very fun to know that Andrew works for the black church, and then talk about the music there, gospel music, or and then have a very have a rich and experience of improvising. That's very fun to hear, and yeah.
I would have a lot of questions and curiosities about the way that worship and faith and Christianity play out in Taiwan and presumably also in the diaspora in North America and elsewhere. But I'm curious if it has whether it has how much it has to do with things that I have experienced that I could talk about. One of them it would be so in Guatemala, we're being at a living in Guatemala for a year and playing at a church there and encountering all this music that to me has a very similar description to what you're saying. With the melody may have 3 notes in it, it may have 5 or 4 notes in it, and it may have 4 chords, or it may have 2 or 3 chords. But and the name that I now associate with that sort of genre that I think I understand to be very popular globally, but I still know that there's some variations regionally in terms of how it works. But globally, there's this CCM music. I think it's Christian contemporary music that has really just kind of become very popular, and especially sort of in the evangelical world globally. And I tend to personally, I mean, I enjoyed that, like playing and singing and learning CCM music in Guatemala was sort of a way that I got to connect with the community there, and I got to have spiritual and musical and artistic connections with people in Guatemala principally through CCM music. But I also personally, and this is part of my own individuality and bias coming in, but I personally get pretty irritated when I understand about how a lot of the history of this music comes from like Hillsong in New Zealand. Even I'm sure there's also a lot of local composers, certainly in Latin America, there are local Spanish speaking composers as well. But a lot of them also in Guatemala, they would just translate songs by Hillsong or some of the other CCM English-speaking songwriters, and it's all, if I don't know about all, but it feels to me sometimes like it's primarily white people from, if it's not New Zealand, then like North America or others of these sort of places where there's this really strong white supremacy culture, and that's the music often that gets spread around the world more than Black gospel music, and a lot of times, and that's also I could also talk about how that's the faith that gets spread around the world, and
Do
sort of
you
the
think
problems that I have
that
with associating Christianity with white supremacy itself. But
do
anyway,
you think that it's gonna change anytime soon? That it's changing,
man,
that in a like a globalized world, we might say, in the 21st century, in the third millennium,
that's
do you
fascinating.
think it's changing? Because we have the opportunity
Yeah.
to listen to gospel music like directly right now, whereas 20
Yep,
years,
we can play.
30
Yep.
years
Mhm.
ago, we
Mhm.
Mhm.
couldn't,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I feel a little bit ignorant about sort of like I don't have an account on TikTok. You can't find me on TikTok. You can find me on YouTube.
oh, I
You can find
cannot.
me on
Yeah, me
Instagram, although
neither.
I don't post there a ton.
I'm
But
not hip enough for
and so I
TikTok.
don't. I'm not. Yeah. I mean, I'm 36 years old. I think I'm past the age where I'm culturally relevant.
Yeah.
So, um, but
My sister bugs me to get a TikTok, but she's 9 years younger than me, so I think it
yeah,
might be
I mean,
like
and to be fair, like at this point,
from
there's
the
plenty of people
20s, 20s and teens.
to be fair, there's plenty of people older than me who are quite active on TikTok and able to get their own work out there. But it's really exciting. I think the potential that we have on something like TikTok, and to be able to really blend worlds together into ways that have never happened before. I've been in Africa a few times recently and seen, people you know, posting videos from across Africa, or whether it was their own country or some other country, and then from the United States and from Europe and from China, or all over, just all over the world, and sort of and there's all this potential for new mashups and imagination and creativity. And I think there's some aesthetic limitations as well to the way that something like TikTok is set up, but still, people are creating things that I never could have dreamed of even 10 years ago,
Yeah,
even
but
5 years
now
ago.
that you mention it, your musical language, it goes very well with the times, very well with the beginning of the third millennium.
Mhm.
Why? Because it's unique. Well, we haven't been in a phase like this before, where if I'm interested in Taiwanese music, I'm just a click away. If I'm
Hmm.
interested in,
Hmm.
like, we have our
Mhm.
translations in the Caribbean of African music, for
Hmm.
example,
Hmm.
like how it got to us, like, uh there was some translation, and that's how salsa, for example, was born, like the rhythm of
Hmm.
salsa, multi-rhythms and polyrhythms and stuff like that. But you can go to the origins of it and see how they were played originally from tradition, from
Mhm.
oral traditions are able to be recorded now, and it's kind of like very exciting to be in a it's the way I see it is the first time in history where we might end up having an princip uh, uh, a principal means of transmitting information through oral means, but because not because we have lost a language, literature, an alphabet, or something like that, but
Huh.
because we have the technology to record
Wow.
ourselves
Wow.
speaking and audiovisually, and
Mhm.
probably the next few generations are gonna learn better that way and not
Wow.
through reading and stuff like that. And
Wow.
reading, well, reading is tends to get, let's say, obfuscated. It changed in the manners that you are expressing, like by the
Mhm.
ones, by the hegemonic powers that edit the
Mm.
text and that distribute them. But if you have them on audiovisual source, then it's not so susceptible, especially if you're transmitting live. Like, it kind of gets out of the
Mhm.
of those hands that can manipulate them, uh, by just being there um, and like, waiting for it, holding on to them and editing them before they are transmitted further. Just my 2 cents. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that people right now are in a position where if there's a will, they can, but it also depends on other
Mhm.
things of culture. So there is a really strange debate, like strange no, but really relevant, really multifaceted. Let's say
Yeah.
that's what I would say about it.
But I think also like what I know of your music, like and I think your music has evolved. Like I've known you since what, like 2006, so
That's correct.
a long time now. Um, yeah, almost
Yeah.
20 years. And your music has evolved a lot over those 20 years. But I think there's always been like this interest in community. Even back then, there was always this interest in the community, engaging in this community. And I think also you've always been, you wanted to welcome community, but you also, I think even now, like also push like the boundaries of maybe what the community expects.
I think that connects with what Shunting is
Yeah.
asked us to ask Andrew in case he didn't make it. Shunting, are you there?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm here again.
You wanted to know about his research, right?
Yeah, I'm very interested in it. Yeah, because
About can you
be,
tell? Can you ask him like
yeah, because
what?
well, I actually go to church too, but I don't know anybody, any friend of mine who actually studies sacred music, and a good friend who was a music teacher, and then he turned into a missionary, and he went to a seminary too, but he didn't study sacred music, even if his major was um, music. So I'm curious about what's your upcoming research at the School of Divinity. Yeah.
So for those who don't know, I'm in a kind of a transition moment in my life. I've left Oakland a few months ago, and I'm gradually making my way all across the United States. Currently, about halfway there in Oak Park, Illinois, and I'll be make the rest of the way by the beginning of August to begin a program. I'll be back in school for the first time in 10 years, getting my second master's. I don't know if I'm not sure the PhD is ever going to happen, but the second master's is about to happen at from Yale Divinity School, and particularly in being with the intention of affiliating with the Institute of Sacred Music, which I think Yale actually has about the only institute of sacred music that certainly that I know of, and that was really something that what drew me to that program and what led me to move across the country and make this really big and radical change for myself. And there's a lot, I mean, I could come back next year and tell you all about what I've learned at Yale Divinity School and the Institute of Sacred Music, because I haven't done I haven't learned too much yet. I would say a couple of things.
But certainly, like in your app, you certainly had goals of things you wanted to study there.
Megan got to read multiple drafts of my application, of my personal statement to get into the program, and she must be at least a little bit privy to the intense psychological turmoil that it brought me, and I know she read completely radically rewritten drafts when I'd totally scrapped one after working on it constantly for months, and then starting all over again from scratch, and that one needing a major revision before that one would be ready. And I mean, and I certainly like, I think, having authentic relationships and being open to learning from people in relationships is an important pedagogical thing, right? It is how we learn, and is how I learn, and just kind of embodying the information that we receive within the community, I think, is important for learning. And I hesitated a lot to go to an academic program because I wasn't sure that that an academic program would really allow for some of that relationship-based learning and really allow for some of that pedagogical-based learning. I definitely think you want to put up the YouTube link. I was just going to say that was direct people there, I think, more so than Bandcamp.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to think that I've learned a lot through just life experience and relationships. And I could talk a lot about sort of how I really think, based on what I think Zhang Ting said earlier, about sort of very traditional aesthetics in the church. And it is true that there's also traditions of boundary pushing within the church in a lot of different ways, but especially but I could talk about specifically in the Black church, how like a soloist might kind of push the timing of the song, push the rhythm, add something, some interpretation and some sounds to the song that never been heard before, that's usually grounded in their own story and life experience, but also in their unique musicality. And that goes back to the West African traditions of call and response and creating community and mutuality through music. But and so there's some of that. Also, I could talk about organists, pianists, and other instrumentalists, bass players, drummers, sort of even now like audio technicians and people who make beats and that kind of thing, sort of really innovating within the Black church. But that being said, like I do feel like there is a more what we might call conservative aesthetic in even the Black church, and probably within just about any church. And some churches have this very radical, almost experimental sort of theology that I tend to be drawn to, and I experience some of those churches where they say these very unusual, unconventional, and really I think spiritually profound things that maybe a Unitarian church or a very adventurous congregational church or something, and then you go and sing a Bach chorale, or you go and sing a folk song that somebody's accompanying on with their guitar, with 3 chords that they're playing on their guitar, and like that's how we accompany this like radical theology or even like radical political activism, because we could talk about some of these theoretically secular activist movements that I also think are very important to me, that also tend to have this what I consider to be a more conservative aesthetic, and that's been kind of a struggle for me in terms of learning about sort of the Black church in academia. It's really taken a while for things to catch up, and some of that, and a lot of this because of white supremacy, but some of it is uniquely because of white supremacy within Black communities, which is not something I really feel very comfortable talking about, and I'm certainly not an expert about it, but I just know that one of the gospel musicians that influenced me particularly is Richard Smallwood, who was who is just a world-renowned songwriter, and he was an undergrad at Howard University, which is a historically Black university, and at Howard University, gospel music was like at this Black institution in the 60s. Gospel music was expressly forbidden. It was similar to a lot of high-class Black churches, and so Richard Smallwood was really kind of radical by creating a gospel choir on the campus of Howard University in the 60s, and so there's a lot to be done, but I think
seems like a bit of a contradiction there, right?
Yeah, it's disturbing to me as a white person, because I know that it was my ancestors, it was my people that were largely responsible for some of the like internalized racism that was happening, and I don't really know how to totally engage with that story other than how to explain sort of the history of exclusion of gospel music within academia. And I bring that all up. I know we're kind of at the 1 hour mark, so I kind of want to at least wrap this up. But I bring that up to say that at the Institute of Sacred Music, they have just started a music in the Black church program that's been around for a few years, and that was really what drew me to that program in particular. It was really what led me to think that it was really worth my time. And so Braxton Shelley is the head of this department. He's a my understanding is that he's a very accomplished gospel keyboardist. I don't know if he sings gospel music a lot too. I'll find out, I guess. And I wouldn't be surprised if he does, but I don't want to make things up. And he's a scholar, and he's like, yeah, we need to study this stuff. And in my opinion, about 50 years too late, the Yale ISM said, yeah, we should be studying this stuff. Why don't you make a department around it? And he made it happen. And speaking, and I mentioned Richard Smallwood earlier. Richard Smallwood is still alive, I think, in his 70s now. And last weekend or 2 weekends, last weekend, he was on the campus of the Yale Institute of Sacred Music, giving lectures and giving a concert and things. So things have really things are moving, I think, in the right direction. And my hope and intention is to be kind of involved and connected with that and learn from that process and be myself sort of changed and growing it within that process and within the kinds of relationships that emerge within that process. So anyway, so that's so, so I don't know. I know we're kind of out of time, so
yeah.
I don't know.
I just wanted to put it out there that you're going to the Yale Institute of Sacred Music.
Yeah.
Is kind of like having this program that is pretty much unique, as I understand it. And yeah, you're right. We're pretty much past the hour, but I wanted to play some of your music so people kind of get a deeper understanding. What do you want me to play something
I'll
from
send you,
In the Water?
Oh yeah, we can play the song called "Wade in the Water" if you have that.
Wade in the Water. Okay, sure.
And so this is also the Trouble Ensemble. You heard at the beginning. Trouble Ensemble was my band that sort of centered around troublemaking, both aesthetically and culturally, and tied to the tradition of activism and troublemaking in the Black church. Wade in the Water features the poetry and spoken word of Marvin K. White, who is just an incredible poet and theologian, and comrade around doing experimental work within faith community, now at Glide Memorial Church. They've been in the news because their founder, Cecil Williams, just died, and Marvin has really kind of picked up the mantle in a very exciting way. And can I also just, before you play this, can I also just mention, I don't have to say a lot about this, but one of my sort of improvisational keyboard things that I'm excited about in the near future is a collaboration with Megan on a solo keyboard piece where we're kind of deconstructing keyboard technique in some very interesting ways. Perhaps I don't know if that may be, I don't know if that needs to be a future episode where we discuss it, or if we just need to invite the audience to see the links, to see information about the performance whenever that actually happens. But I didn't want to mention just doing that and how much that's really.
But I do think that it does fit in. Like, we are doing a lot of deconstructing together too.
So and it's just been incredibly gratifying. And Megan's music has always really consistently blown my mind. So I just wanted to make sure that we had
pretty cool that you mentioned it. Yeah, they are having a collaboration. Megan's next piece, next composition is specifically for Andrew and specifically for his synthesizer, electric synthesizer. Yeah, there you are.
If anybody can see.
It's a Yamaha DX8, I believe.
Oh, I thought that may happen. This light might fall. So anyway, okay. I've talked too much. Go ahead. We'll go ahead and.
Okay, let's listen to "Wade in the Water."
Yeah, let's play some music.
just because it threw itself at you. A river is not a rock. It foams at the mouth. It crashes all the time. It drinks. But don't expect it to apologize. A river don't have to bend to you. A river won't ever take anything back. A river won't ever cry for you. A river can only cry to you. And it never feel like it need to wait and see what damage it has done. Get in the river. A river got those hands. A river answers everything and everybody with a slap. A river comes and goes as it pleases. Do not think that it's supposed to stand for your foolishness. You want your skin to be sea glass, smooth and pumice. You think that the water should walk to you. Well, a river won't stand for it. A river won't stand for nothing. A river is a living thing, and a river is supposed to run. Don't ever tell a river nothing you want to hold. A river got a big old mouth, talks behind your back, keeps ocean current on everything, and a river definitely don't listen to no quiet storm. Get in the river. A river knows the difference between keeping your eyes open underwater and learning to see through salt tears. A river knows the difference between floating someone a favor and being a life preserver for someone. A river knows the difference between someone who gets their kicks out of you and getting pulled under by someone. Get in the river. Know that your swim lane and your flow chart are perfectly grouped according to your processes and ability. Know that there's a difference between shedding and treading, between drench and foam and curl of a lip, and whip and wave and crash and being left with nothing. There's a difference when you realize the water course does not change, that your why existence is debt ledgered into a how column. And despite what cruise you thought you signed up for, you still gotta find a way to pull and push through this world. Get in the river. Do not think through your privilege. A river is worth its salt. Insist on naming all its girl offspring FEMA. A river comes from rivers that ran out of Eden. Rather than being caught there, you must not be thin-skinned. Get in the river. You are not from around here, cannot fathom the depths in this stream of consciousness. Now is not the time to think things through. If you...
I think that's a nice spot to leave it. We heard most of the chunk. Like the poetry was from Marvin K. White, you said?
Yep, Minister Marvin K. White.
Okay.
Incredible co-conspirator around deconstruction. I think he might even accept me calling him a deconstruction worker. Although I don't think I've done that for him yet, but I think he might be okay with
deconstruction. I will surely steal that term.
Wonderful.
That should be more well known.
It is. I googled it one day. There is a podcast called Deconstruction Workers that exists, but that doesn't stop me from using the term for my own purposes. But yeah,
well, of course.
Well, thank you so much for having me, for talking about this music and work, and thank you for doing what you do and doing the kinds of conversations and even community building that I think is so valuable, as we've discussed. So yes, thank you.
Hopefully, we will invite you in a year when you can share a lot about your school.
I don't know if I'll know more or less after having been sort of shaped. If I'm shaped by this institution, but I would love to be back and share my experiences with you all.
Well, that was Andrew.
Yeah, we could definitely at some point too look in our collaboration at a future.
I think that we hope to have you when
Taking
once
the
that
pieces.
piece is done. I know that it's taken Megan a lot of work and a lot of imagination, a lot of back and forth
It's
to
going to be a lot of work for me to learn too, and I'm thrilled about it. But I'm also like, yeah, this is a serious piece of art that we're doing. So
Looking forward to it.
yeah.
Definitely.
Anyway, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
that was Andrew Barnes Jamieson, composer, improviser, and the
Yeah.
construction worker. So, thanks for being here with us, man.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you soon.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.